the fall of 1957, a woman named Dorothy Caldwell found a photograph hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible in her dead grandmother's closet. 6 faces stared back at her from 1874. On the back, in her grandmother's handwriting, 3 words. They were telling the truth. What those 6 people tried to tell the world, and what Dorothy's family did to silence them, would take her 3 years to uncover and the rest of her life to live with. Before we continue with Dorothy's investigation and the nightmare she found buried inside her own bloodline, Nightmare Legacy isn't for casual listeners. We dig into the chapters of American history that were deliberately erased. The stories sealed in courthouse basements and hidden inside family Bibles because the truth was too dangerous for daylight. If you've made it this far, you understand that some secrets don't stay buried forever. Hit subscribe right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss these stories, and drop a comment telling me what state you're listening from. Are you near Savannah? Does your family have old photographs that nobody wants to explain? Let us know. We read every single comment. Now let me take you back to an autumn afternoon in 1957, when a librarian opened a Bible that hadn't been touched in decades and found something inside that should have been destroyed 83 years ago. Savannah, Georgia, in 1957 was a city that wore its history like perfume. Heavy, sweet, impossible to ignore. Moss-draped oaks lined the squares. Iron-gated mansions sat behind walls of boxwood and azalea, yet their facades maintained with the obsessive care of people who understood that appearances were everything. Beneath the charm, beneath the garden parties and the church socials and the careful manners, Savannah kept its secrets the way old families keep silver, locked away, polished occasionally, never discussed with outsiders. Dorothy Caldwell was 43 years old, divorced, and practical in the way that women become practical when life strips away their illusions one by one. She worked as a librarian at the Savannah Public Library on Bull Street, a job that paid modestly but suited her temperament. She believed in facts, in documentation, in the quiet power of written records to preserve what memory distorted and time erased. She had inherited the narrow brick townhouse on Abercorn Street from her father, Richard Caldwell, who had inherited it from his mother, Vivian Caldwell. Vivian had lived alone in that house from 1908 until her death in 1953, and in all those years she had changed nothing. The rooms were dark, crowded with heavy furniture and thick curtains that turned afternoon sunlight into a dim amber haze. Every surface held photographs in tarnished frames, porcelain figurines coated in dust, and leather-bound books whose spines had cracked from decades of humidity. Dorothy had avoided the house for 4 years after Vivian's death, partly from grief, partly from the overwhelming task of sorting through 70 years of accumulated possessions. But by 1957, with her 2 daughters growing up and needing more space, she decided it was time to make the Abercorn Street house livable. She started with Vivian's bedroom, a modest room at the back of the 2nd floor overlooking a courtyard choked with wisteria and Confederate jasmine. The wallpaper was dark burgundy, peeling at the seams. The closet was packed floor to ceiling with hat boxes, shoe boxes, and stacks of folded linens that smelled of camphor and age. Dorothy worked methodically, sorting everything into 3 categories: keep, donate, discard. She had been at it for most of a Saturday afternoon when she pulled a large Bible from the back of the closet's top shelf. It was a family Bible, the kind that recorded births, marriages, and deaths on special pages at the front. Heavy leather-bound, with gilt-edged pages. Dorothy had seen it before. Vivian had kept it on a shelf in the parlor for years before apparently moving it to the closet. It wasn't unusual. Old family Bibles were common in Savannah houses. Every family had one. But when Dorothy lifted it, something felt wrong. The weight was distributed oddly, heavier in the center than a book should be. She opened it and immediately understood why. Someone had cut a rectangular cavity into the pages. Starting about 50 pages in and extending nearly to the back cover, the pages had been carefully sliced with a razor, creating a hidden compartment approximately 6 inches wide, 4 inches tall, and 2 inches deep. Inside the compartment, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, was a photograph and a folded letter. Dorothy set the Bible on her grandmother's bed and unwrapped the silk with trembling fingers. The photograph was mounted on thick cardboard, the kind used by professional studios in the 19th century. It showed 6 people seated on the wooden steps of a small church. 5 black men and women in their Sunday clothes, sitting very straight, very still, with the solemn expressions common in photographs from that era when long exposure times demanded absolute stillness. But it was the 6th position that made Dorothy's breath catch. On the far right of the group, there was an empty chair, a simple wooden chair placed deliberately in the frame, with no one sitting in it. Someone had been meant to sit there, someone who wasn't present. Dorothy turned the photograph over. On the back, embossed in gold lettering, were the words, Harrington and Sons, Portraits and Daguerreotypes, 42 Drayton Street, Savannah, Georgia, 1874. And below that, in handwriting, Dorothy recognized immediately as her grandmother Vivian's. Yours were 3 words written in ink that had faded to the color of dried blood. They were telling the truth. Dorothy stood in the dim bedroom holding a photograph that had been hidden inside a Bible for 83 years, staring at 5 faces and 1 empty chair, and felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She unfolded the letter. It was written on cream-colored paper in an elegant hand that was not Vivian's. The ink was brown with age, but still legible. The letter was dated June 8th, 1874. My dearest Vivian, I write to you knowing that what I must say will cause you pain. But I believe you would rather know the truth than live in comfortable ignorance. The inquiry has been closed. Sheriff Harding has declared that there is insufficient evidence to support the allegations brought by the 6 individuals who came forward. No charges will be filed. We both know this is wrong. We both know what your father confessed to you in his final days. We both know those 6 people spoke the truth, and that truth has been buried as surely as those poor souls beneath the smokehouse. The photograph I arranged through Mr. Harrington is enclosed. You asked me to have it made, and I understood your reasons. It is proof that these people existed, that they came forward, that they tried. The empty chair is for Josiah, who disappeared 3 weeks before the sitting. I insisted it remain in the frame. His absence speaks as loudly as the other's presence. Keep this photograph safe, Vivian. Hide it if you must. But do not destroy it. Someday, perhaps, when we are both gone and the world has changed enough to hear what these people tried to say, someone will find it. Someone will understand. Your faithful friend, Catherine. Dorothy read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on the edge of her grandmother's bed and stared at the photograph until the light faded from the window and the room went dark around her. Her grandmother had hidden this photograph deliberately, had cut a compartment into a Bible to conceal it, had written 3 words on the back that confirmed something terrible. They were telling the truth. About what? Dorothy's first move was to call her mother-in-law, Agnes Caldwell, who was 81 and still sharp. The kind of woman who remembered every name, every date, every slight and kindness from decades past. She had married into the Caldwell family in 1898 and had lived in the Abercorn Street house until 1925. A photograph? Agnes's voice crackled over the phone line. Hidden in a Bible? No, Dorothy, I never saw anything like that. Your grandmother was a private woman. She didn't share family business. Not with me, certainly. What about someone named Catherine? Dorothy asked. A friend of Vivian's? A long pause. There was a Catherine Ashmore, Judge Ashmore's daughter. She and Vivian were close when they were young, but Catherine never married. She moved away sometime in the 80s. The 1880s, I mean. I don't know what became of her. And the name Josiah? Does that mean anything to you? Another pause. Longer this time. No, Agnes said finally. I don't know any Josiah. Why are you asking all these questions, Dorothy? I'm just trying to understand some old family papers I found. Well, my advice is to leave old papers alone. The past has a way of causing trouble when you dig into it. Dorothy thanked her and hung up. Agnes's warning echoed in her mind, but it only strengthened her resolve. She was a librarian. Research was what she did. And something about those 5 faces and that empty chair demanded answers. She started with the photographer. If Harrington and Sons had operated on Drayton Street in 1874, there would be records. Savannah kept meticulous archives. The next afternoon, Dorothy drove to the Georgia Historical Society on Whitaker Street. The building was a converted mansion with high ceilings and the permanent smell of old paper. She spoke to the archivist, a thin man named Gerald Proctor who wore round spectacles and had the careful hands of someone who spent his life handling fragile things. Harrington and Sons, Gerald repeated, adjusting his glasses. Yes, they were one of the more prolific studios in Savannah during Reconstruction, operated from about 1868 to 1885. We have some of their ledgers. What year are you looking for? 1874, sometime in the spring or early summer. Gerald disappeared into the archive room and returned 20 minutes later with a leather-bound ledger. He set it on the reading table and opened it carefully. Dorothy scanned the entries, dozens of them. Portraits of Savannah families, wedding photographs, memorial portraits of deceased children. And then on the page, dated May 22, 1874, she found it. Reverend Isaac Downing. Group portrait. 6 subjects. Outdoor setting. Steps of New Hope AME Church, Effingham County. Paid in full by Miss C. Ashmore. $2.50. And note, 1 chair left empty per client instruction. Catherine Ashmore had paid for the photograph. Reverend Isaac Downing had arranged it. And the location was a church in Effingham County, the same county where the Caldwell family's plantation had been located. Do you know anything about New Hope AME Church? Dorothy asked Gerald. AME churches were established throughout Georgia after the war, Gerald said. Most of them served the freed black communities. Some still exist. Others were abandoned or destroyed. Effingham County is about 30 miles northwest of here. If the church was established during Reconstruction, There might be records in the Freedmen's Bureau files. Dorothy spent the next 3 hours in the archive room. She found a reference to Reverend Isaac Downing in the Freedmen's Bureau records, dated March 1871. Reverend Isaac Downing, minister, New Hope African Methodist Episcopal Church, located approximately 12 miles west of Springfield, Effingham County, near the former Ashford Hall Plantation. Congregation approximately 30 families. School established 1870, serving 45 children. Ashford Hall. Dorothy's stomach dropped. That was the name of her family's plantation, the estate that had been sold in 1870 after her great-grandfather William Caldwell's death. She had heard the name spoken in whispers at family gatherings, always with the same wistful nostalgia that old Savannah families used when discussing lost wealth and vanished grandeur. But now the name felt different. It felt like a door that had been locked for 80 years, and she had just found the key. The Chatham County Courthouse sat on Wright Square, a building Dorothy had walked past 1,000 times without entering. She went the following afternoon and asked to see inquiry records from 1874. The clerk, a bored young man who clearly wished he were somewhere else, led her to a basement storage room lined with metal shelving. The shelves held hundreds of boxes organized by year and category. Dorothy found the box labeled Inquiries, Effingham County, 1874, and carried it to a small table beneath a bare light bulb. Inside were thin folders containing handwritten records of minor disputes, property disagreements, and allegations of various kinds. Near the bottom, she found a folder labeled Inquiry Re, Ashford Hall Estate, Effingham County, May 1874. The folder contained 4 pages. The first page was a formal record, County of Chatham, State of Georgia, record of inquiry, and date opened, May 6, 1874. Matter: allegations brought by 6 individuals, names listed below, regarding unlawful confinement and resulting deaths of 5 individuals at Ashford Hall Plantation during the period of January to February 1864. 5 people, 5 human beings. Individuals bringing allegations. 1. Solomon Bridges, age 38, laborer. 2. Hannah Bridges, age 34, domestic worker, ***. 3. Ezekiel Tate, age 45, laborer, ***. 4. Lila Cobb, age 29, domestic worker, ***. 5. Josiah Freeman, age 41, laborer, ***. 6. Nettie Greer, age 25, domestic worker. Allegations: the above-named individuals claim to have direct knowledge of the unlawful confinement and resulting deaths of 5 enslaved persons on the property of Ashford Hall Plantation in or around January to February 1864. And the deceased are identified as Daniel, male, approximately 35 years; Phoebe, female, approximately 28 years; Isaac, male, approximately 22 years; Clara, female, approximately 40 years, and her son James, male, approximately 12 years. A 12-year-old boy. Dorothy's hands began to shake. Nature of allegations: the individuals claim that the 5 deceased persons were confined in a root cellar beneath the smokehouse on the Ashford Hall property as punishment for planning to flee toward Union lines during Sherman's advance through Georgia. The property owner, William Caldwell, upon learning of the approach of federal forces, departed the property with his family in mid-January 1864. Prior to departing, Mr. Caldwell allegedly sealed the entrance to the root cellar with stones and mortar, preventing the confined individuals from escaping. The allegations state that Mr. Caldwell was absent from the property for approximately 5 weeks. Upon returning in late February 1864, he discovered that the 5 confined individuals had perished. The allegations further state that Mr. Caldwell destroyed the smokehouse by fire, burning the structure and its contents, including the remains of the deceased, and subsequently denied that any confinement had occurred, sealed them in with stones and mortar, left for 5 weeks, a woman and her 12-year-old son among them. Dorothy had to put the file down. She pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed until the nausea passed. Then she forced herself to continue reading or investigation conducted. Sheriff Albert Harding visited the former site of Ashford Hall Plantation on May 12, 1874. Property has been sold and subdivided since the events in question. Current owner Mr. James Whitfield states that when he purchased the property in 1870, several structures, including a smokehouse, were no longer standing. Mr. Whitfield states that the area where the smokehouse reportedly stood shows evidence of burning consistent with deliberate destruction. However, Mr. Whitfield notes that many structures were burned during Sherman's March, and that the burning of the smokehouse could have occurred at that time. Testimony of family. Mrs. Adelaide Caldwell, widow of William Caldwell, deceased 1869, and Miss Vivian Caldwell, daughter, were interviewed on May 15, 1874. Both stated they had no knowledge of any unlawful confinement or deaths on the property. Both stated that William Caldwell was a man of Christian character who treated his workers humanely within the customs of the time. Dorothy felt bile rise in her throat. Her grandmother Vivian had lied. She had looked the sheriff in the eye and denied everything. And the letter hidden in the Bible proved she knew the truth the entire time. Conclusion. Due to the lack of physical evidence, the passage of 10 years since the alleged events, the death of the accused party, William Caldwell, deceased 1869, and the conflicting testimony, this inquiry is closed without findings. No charges to be brought. Matter concluded May 28, 1874. Sheriff Albert Harding, 7 weeks. The entire inquiry had lasted 7 weeks. 5 people died in a sealed cellar, and the investigation lasted 7 weeks before being stamped closed. Dorothy sat in that basement for a long time. The bare bulb hummed above her head. Somewhere upstairs, phones rang, and people went about their ordinary days. Nobody knew what she was reading. Nobody knew that 83 years ago, 6 people had walked into a courthouse and tried to get justice for 5 people who died in the dark. And nobody had listened. Dorothy spent the following weeks tracking the 6 witnesses. What she found followed a pattern so precise it couldn't be coincidental. Solomon Bridges. Born into slavery at Ashford Hall around 1836. After emancipation, he worked as a sharecropper on land 4 miles from the old estate. He and his wife Hannah had 3 children. Dorothy found Solomon's death certificate dated August 3, 1874. And 3 months after the photograph was taken, cause of death, accidental drowning, found in the Ogeechee River near his home. No investigation conducted. Hannah Bridges died 11 weeks later, October 19, 1874. Cause of death, fever. She was 34 years old and had been healthy enough to walk to Savannah and testify before a sheriff 3 months earlier. Her 3 children were taken in by relatives. No further records of them exist. Ezekiel Tate died on December 2, 1874. Cause of death: injuries sustained in a logging accident. He had been struck by a falling tree while working a timber crew near Springfield. The death was ruled accidental. No witnesses to the incident were recorded. 3 witnesses dead in 7 months, all ruled accidental, all within the same calendar year as the inquiry. Lila Cobb disappeared, and Dorothy found her listed in the 1870 census as a domestic servant in Savannah. After 1874, no record of her existed, no death certificate, no marriage record, no property documents, no mention in any church registry. She had simply vanished. Josiah Freeman, the man whose empty chair haunted the photograph. He had disappeared 3 weeks before the photograph was taken. Catherine Ashmore's letter mentioned him by name. Dorothy searched for any record of him after April 1874 and found nothing. No death certificate, no census entry, and no trace. He had been erased so completely, it was as if he had never existed at all. And then there was Nettie Greer. Nettie's trail was the longest and the most disturbing. Dorothy found her in multiple documents, spanning nearly a decade after the photograph. She had worked as a laundress in Savannah and living in a boarding house on West Broad Street. In the 1876 city directory, she was listed with a notation, infirm. Dorothy found a reference to her in the patient registry of the Savannah Poorhouse, where she had been admitted in 1879. Next to her name, in cramped handwriting, cannot speak, cause unknown. Patient appears to understand questions, but is unable to form words or sounds. Nettie Greer had been a witness. She had spoken the truth. And by 1876, she could no longer speak at all. She died in the poorhouse in 1883, cause of death, consumption. She was 34 years old. She had spent the last 7 years of her life unable to tell anyone what she knew, unable to say the names of the 5 people who died in that cellar, unable to speak the truth that had been cut out of her, one way or another. Dorothy laid the death certificates and records out on her kitchen table and looked at them together. 6 witnesses, 3 dead within 7 months. 2 vanished completely, 1 silenced permanently. And her family had done this. Her grandmother had known. Her great-grandmother had helped cover it up. And somewhere in the chain of wealth and influence that connected the Caldwell name to Savannah's power structure, someone had given orders that ensured those 6 voices would never be heard again. Dorothy needed to find Catherine Ashmore, the letter writer, the woman who had arranged the photograph and who clearly knew the full truth. She returned to the Georgia Historical Society and asked Gerald Proctor for help. Catherine Ashmore, Gerald said thoughtfully. Judge Ashmore's daughter. That's a prominent family. Okay, so their papers might be in the university collections. He made several phone calls. 2 days later, he called Dorothy with news. The Ashmore family papers were held in the special collections at the University of Georgia in Athens. Dorothy made the 3-hour drive on a Saturday. The librarian brought out 2 boxes of documents: letters, legal papers, personal effects. And in the second box, wrapped in tissue paper, Dorothy found what she was looking for: a diary, Catherine Ashmore's diary, spanning 1872 to 1882, written in the same elegant hand as the letter hidden in the Bible. Dorothy opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. February 14th, 1874. Vivian came to see me today. She was greatly distressed. She told me something her father confessed to her before his death in 1869. I can barely bring myself to write it. 5 people, sealed in a cellar, left there for 5 weeks while the family fled Sherman's army. When William returned, they were dead, all of them, including a boy of 12 years. He burned the smokehouse to destroy the evidence. He told no one except Vivian on his deathbed, when the weight of it had become too much to carry into eternity. He asked her to pray for his soul. He did not ask her to tell the truth. March 3rd, 1874. Reverend Downing came to me with a terrible dilemma. 6 members of his congregation have come forward with a story about Ashford Hall. They were enslaved there. They found the bodies after the smokehouse was burned. The ashes didn't destroy everything. They saw bones. They saw the stones and mortar that had been used to seal the cellar entrance. They have carried this knowledge for 10 years, and they want justice. Their story matches exactly what Vivian told me her father confessed. I told Reverend Downing the truth. That justice was unlikely, but that bearing witness matters regardless of the outcome. April 20th, 1874. The 6 witnesses went to Sheriff Harding. Reverend Downing accompanied them. I have prayed for them all day. I am terrified for their safety. May 1st, 1874. Josiah Freeman has disappeared. He was the most outspoken of the 6. His wife says he left for work 3 days ago and never returned. No one has seen him. I am frightened. May 24th, 1874. I arranged for the remaining 5 witnesses to have their photograph taken at Harrington Studio. I insisted on including an empty chair for Josiah. His absence must be recorded. His silence must speak. May 29th, 1874. The inquiry is closed. No evidence. No charges. I delivered the photograph to Vivian as she requested. She wept when she saw it. She knows those people are telling the truth. She knows her father was guilty, and she denied it to the sheriff's face. I do not judge her. I understand the impossible position she is in, but I grieve for those 6 people who risked everything and received nothing. August 5th, 1874. Solomon Bridges is dead. Drowned, they say. Vivian came to me in a state of near collapse. She believes it was not an accident. She believes her family, her mother specifically, has arranged for the witnesses to be eliminated. I told her she must be careful. I told her she must protect herself. But we both know what is happening. October 22nd, 1874. Hannah Bridges is dead. Fever. 3 witnesses gone in less than 6 months. Vivian no longer leaves her house. She has stopped attending church. She writes to me in coded language, afraid her letters are being read. December 5th, 1874. Ezekiel Tate is dead. An accident, they claim. Vivian's mother, Adelaide, attended a social gathering last week and was heard to remark that troublemakers in the county seemed to be having a run of bad luck. She said it with a smile. Dorothy had to stop reading. She closed the diary and pressed her forehead against the cool surface of the reading table. Adelaide Caldwell, her great-grandmother, smiling about the deaths of witnesses her family had arranged to kill. She forced herself to continue. January 1875. Lila Cobb has vanished. Rachel, too, has disappeared. No one knows where they went. Reverend Downing has moved his family to Atlanta out of fear for their safety. March 1875. Eco, I have learned that Nettie Greer, the last surviving witness still in the area, has lost the ability to speak. The doctor says he cannot determine a cause. I have my own suspicions about what was done to her, but I cannot prove anything. The 6 witnesses are gone, 3 dead, 2 vanished, 1 silenced, and the world continues as if nothing happened. The final entry related to the case was dated 1880. Saw Vivian today for the first time in 2 years. She has aged terribly. We did not speak directly of the Ashford Hall matter, but it hangs between us like smoke. She told me she has hidden the photograph inside a Bible. She said she cannot destroy it because those faces deserve to exist somewhere. But she cannot display it because the truth it represents would destroy her family. We are both carrying ghosts, she and I. The difference is that her ghosts share her last name. Dorothy drove back to Savannah with Catherine Ashmore's words burning in her mind. She spent the next week organizing everything she had found: the photograph, the letter, the inquiry records, the death certificates, excerpts from Catherine's diary, her own written account of every conversation and discovery. She knew she needed to find descendants of the witnesses. If anyone could confirm what had happened, it would be the families of the 6 people in the photograph. She started with the Bridges family. Solomon and Hannah's 3 children had been raised by relatives after their parents' deaths. Dorothy traced the family through census records, marriage certificates, and church registries until she found a living descendant, James Bridges. He enlisted in the 1955 Savannah City Directory, age 72, living in a small house in the Kyler-Brownsville neighborhood. Dorothy drove there on a Tuesday evening. The house was small, well kept, with a porch swing and a row of potted plants along the railing. She knocked and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. An elderly black man opened the door. He had white hair, deep-set eyes, and hands that showed decades of manual labor. He looked at Dorothy with the patient wariness of a man who had learned long ago to be careful around white strangers. "Mr. Bridges? James Bridges?" "That's right. My name is Dorothy Caldwell. I'm a librarian here in Savannah. I've been researching my family's history, and I found a photograph that I believe includes your grandparents." She held out the photograph, and James Bridges looked at it for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a recognition that went deeper than memory. "Where did you get this?" His voice was quiet, controlled. "It was hidden in my grandmother's Bible. I found it during a renovation." "Mr. Bridges, are these your grandparents?" He pointed to the couple on the left side of the photograph. "Solomon and Hannah Bridges. My father's parents. I never knew them. They died before my father was old enough to remember their faces." He looked up at Dorothy. "Caldwell, you said? Your people owned Ashford Hall?" "Yes." James Bridges studied her for a long time. Then he stepped back from the door. "You'd better come inside, Mrs. Caldwell. And you'd better be ready to hear things your family never wanted you to know." They sat in his front room. The walls were covered with family photographs spanning generations. James made coffee and then told Dorothy the story his father had carried his entire life. "My father was 2 years old when his parents died," James began. "His aunt raised him. When he was old enough to understand, she told him what happened. She said his parents and 4 other people tried to get justice for something terrible that happened at Ashford Hall during the war. He paused, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. There were 5 people: Daniel, Phoebe, Isaac, Clara, and her boy James. James was 12. Same name as me. My father named me after that boy. He said he wanted someone to carry the name of a child who died in the dark with nobody to help him. His voice broke slightly. He took a breath and continued. They were locked in a root cellar. Punishment for planning to run. The man who owned them, your great-grandfather, sealed the entrance with stones before he left. Sealed it like a tomb. He took his family and ran from Sherman's army and left 5 human beings locked underground with no food, no water, and no way out. When he came back 5 weeks later, they were dead. All of them. My father's aunt said the people who found them afterwards said there were scratch marks on the walls, fingernail marks in the stone. And one of them, they think it was Clara, had used a nail to carve something into the wall before she died. Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. And what did she carve? James looked at her steadily. We are here. January 22nd. God remember us. The room was silent. Dorothy felt tears running down her face. She didn't wipe them away. Your great-grandfather burned the smokehouse to destroy the evidence, James continued. But he couldn't burn stone. The cellar walls were still there, under the ash and rubble. My grandparents and the others saw them. They saw the scratch marks. They saw Clara's message. They carried that knowledge for 10 years before they found the courage to speak. And then they were killed for it, Dorothy said. Yes, ma'am. My grandfather drowned. My grandmother took sick and died 2 months later. The others disappeared or died in accidents. My father's aunt always said it wasn't coincidence. She said the Caldwell family had connections. Money, power, the kind of people who could make problems go away without getting their own hands dirty. Dorothy couldn't speak. She sat in James Bridges' front room, surrounded by photographs of a family that had survived despite her own family's efforts to destroy them, and she felt a shame so deep it sat in her bones like fever. Mr. Bridges, she finally managed. I am so sorry. I can't undo what was done. But I want you to know that I believe your grandparents. I believe every word of what they tried to tell the world. James gave her a look that contained decades of accumulated grief, patience, and something that might have been grace. I appreciate that, Mrs. Caldwell, but I'll tell you what my father told me before he died. He said, justice didn't come for us then, and it probably won't come for us now. But as long as someone remembers their names, they're not completely gone. That's all we can ask. Just remember their names. Just when we thought the horror of Ashford Hall had reached its depths, Dorothy's investigation revealed something even darker. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Dorothy spent the next month in a state of agonized indecision. She had the evidence, she had the testimony, she had Catherine Ashmore's diary confirming everything. She could go to the newspapers, she could contact historians, she could make the truth public and let the consequences fall where they fell. But the consequences would fall on her daughters. 2 girls, 14 and 11. Growing up in a city where the Caldwell name still carried weight. A city where old families remembered old alliances and old grievances. Going public would mean their mother had branded their ancestors as murderers. It would follow them through school, through college, through their careers, through their lives. Dorothy knew what that felt like. She had grown up with the polished version of the Caldwell legacy, the genteel plantation owners, the Christian family who treated their workers humanely, the war heroes who lost everything but their dignity. All of it was a lie, and she was about to decide whether to tell the world. She visited James Bridges one more time. She told him she was struggling with the decision. James had listened quietly. March then said something that Dorothy would remember for the rest of her life. "Mrs. Caldwell, my grandparents had children too. They knew speaking out might put their family in danger. They did it anyway because they believed the truth mattered more than safety. But I'm not going to tell you what to do. You've got to live with whatever you decide. All I'll say is this: those 5 people in that cellar, they carved a message in the wall because they wanted someone to know they existed. They wanted someone to remember. Whether you tell the world or just remember them quietly in your own heart, that's your choice. But don't forget them. That's all I ask." Dorothy went home and sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours. She looked at the photograph. 5 faces and an empty chair. Or she read Catherine Ashmore's diary entries until she knew them by memory. She read the death certificates of the 3 witnesses who had been murdered. And then she made her decision. She would not go public. Not now. Not while her daughters were young. But she would not destroy the evidence either. She would preserve every document, every photograph, every record she had gathered. She would seal it in a metal box with a letter explaining everything and deposit it in a bank vault with instructions that it be delivered to the Georgia Historical Society after her death. She wrote the letter on a cold evening in December 1959. It took her 4 hours. "To whom it may concern, my name is Dorothy Caldwell, and I am the great-granddaughter of William Caldwell, who owned Ashford Hall Plantation in Effingham County, Georgia. It's in the autumn of 1957, I discovered a photograph hidden inside a Bible in my grandmother's house. That discovery led me to uncover a truth that my family spent 83 years trying to erase. She documented everything: the photograph, the letter from Catherine Ashmore, the inquiry records, the death certificates, Catherine's diary entries, James Bridges' testimony, her own research into the fates of the 6 witnesses. She concluded the letter with words that echoed across decades. "I have chosen not to make this information public during my lifetime. I have children who would bear the burden of sins they did not commit, and I cannot do that to them. But I also cannot destroy this evidence. 5 people died in a cellar because my great-grandfather sealed them in and walked away. 6 people tried to speak the truth and were silenced for it. Their names deserve to be remembered. Their courage deserves to be honored. I leave this decision to the future. When I am gone, when my children are strong enough to weather whatever comes, this package will be opened. Whoever opens it will have the truth. What they do with it is their choice. But please, remember their names: Daniel, Phoebe, Isaac, Clara, James, Solomon Bridges, Hannah Bridges, Ezekiel Tate, Lila Cobb, Josiah Freeman, Nettie Greer. They existed, they suffered, they tried, and they were erased until now." Dorothy Caldwell, December 14th, 1959. She sealed the box. She deposited it at the Savannah Bank and Trust. She went home and tried to live her life. The years passed with the slow weight of a secret that never fully settled. Dorothy remarried in 1963. A good man named Harold Patterson, who knew nothing about Ashford Hall and to whom Dorothy never told the story. She thought about telling him 100 times, but could never find the words. How do you explain to the man you love that your great-grandfather sealed 5 people in a cellar and left them to claw at the walls until they died? She kept teaching. Her daughters grew up. They went to college. They started families of their own. Dorothy watched them build lives unburdened by the knowledge she carried, and she told herself she had made the right choice. But at night, when the house was quiet and Harold was sleeping, she would lie awake thinking about the photograph, about 5 faces in an empty chair, about a 12-year-old boy named James who died in the dark, about a woman named Clara who used her last hours of life to carve a message into stone because she wanted someone to know she had been there. We are here. February 22nd. God remember us, and He will always remember us. Dorothy added a second letter to the bank vault in 1991, 2 years before her death. She was 77 and her heart was failing. I am dying, and I still don't know if I was right or wrong. I protected my children, but I also allowed 5 people to remain forgotten for 40 more years. Was that mercy or cowardice? I no longer know the difference. But I kept the evidence, I kept the photograph, I kept the names, and soon someone else will have the chance to do what I couldn't. Please be braver than I was. Dorothy Caldwell Patterson died on March 8, 1993. She was 79. Her obituary described her as a dedicated librarian and beloved mother. There was no mention of Ashford Hall, no mention of a photograph hidden in a Bible, no mention of 5 people who died in a root cellar in 1864. 8 months after Dorothy's death, her executor followed the instructions in her will. The metal box was delivered to the Georgia Historical Society in November 1993. The director at that time was Dr. Leonard Harris, a historian specializing in Reconstruction-era Georgia. When he opened Dorothy's package and began reading, he understood immediately what he was holding. Dr. Harris spent 9 months verifying Dorothy's research. He located additional records. He interviewed descendants of both the Caldwell family and the 6 witnesses. He consulted legal scholars and ethics experts about how to handle the material. And on May 28, 1994, exactly 120 years after the original inquiry was closed, he held a press conference. This story made national news. The photograph of the 5 witnesses in the empty chair was reproduced in newspapers and magazines across the country. Historians debated Dorothy's choice. Ethicists argued about the obligations of descendants. The Caldwell family issued a statement expressing deep regret while simultaneously questioning the reliability of the evidence. But the response that mattered most came from the descendants. Dr. Harris located family members of all 6 witnesses. He invited them to Savannah for a memorial service. It was held on June 15, 1994, at the New Hope AME Church in Effingham County, which had been rebuilt in the 1930s and still held services every Sunday, and over 400 people attended. They came from Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, New York, and California. They came because their great-grandparents had tried to speak the truth in 1874 and had been silenced. And now, 120 years later, someone was finally ready to listen. The names were read aloud, all 11 of them. The 5 who died in the cellar, the 6 who tried to bear witness, Daniel, Phoebe, Isaac, Clara, James, Solomon Bridges, Hannah Bridges, Ezekiel Tate, Lila Cobb, Josiah Freeman, Nettie Greer, James Bridges' son Robert, now 68 years old, stood at the front of the church, holding a framed copy of the photograph. He pointed to the empty chair. "That chair was for Josiah Freeman," Robert said. "He disappeared 3 weeks before this picture was taken. Nobody ever found him. Nobody ever will." But Catherine Ashmore insisted that chair stay in the frame because his absence was part of the story, because being erased is its own kind of testimony. A historical marker was erected at the site of the former Ashford Hall Plantation in August 1994. It was made of Georgia granite, 4 feet tall, with a bronze plaque. In memory of Daniel, Phoebe, Isaac, Clara, and James, who died in confinement on this property in January to February 1864. In memory of Solomon Bridges, Hannah Bridges, Ezekiel Tate, Lila Cobb, Josiah Freeman, and Nettie Greer, who bore witness and paid the price for their courage. May their voices finally be heard. The marker still stands today. It sits at the edge of a county road, surrounded by pine trees and farmland, all is in a place that looks nothing like a plantation and everything like the kind of quiet countryside where terrible things can happen without anyone noticing. And in the Avery Research Center at the University of Georgia, preserved behind glass, is a photograph of 5 people and an empty chair. Visitors can view it during regular hours. If you look closely at their faces, past the sepia tone and the formal poses and the long exposure stillness, you can see something that survives the limitations of 19th century photography. You can see people who knew the cost of speaking and chose to speak anyway. This mystery shows us something about the weight of truth and the price of silence. It shows us the courage doesn't always win, that doing the right thing can get you killed, that the people who try to speak are sometimes the ones who disappear. But it also shows us that evidence survives, that a photograph hidden inside a Bible for 83 years can outlast the people who tried to bury the truth, that a message carved into a cellar wall by a dying woman can echo across a century and still be heard. We are here, January 22nd. God remember us. Clara carved those words, knowing she would never leave that cellar. She carved them because she believed that someday someone would find them, that someday someone would care enough to remember. She was right. It just took 130 years. What would you have done in Dorothy's place? Would you have gone public immediately and accepted the consequences? Would you have stayed silent to protect your children? Or would you have made the same compromise she did, preserving the truth while delaying its release? There are no easy answers. But the question itself matters. Because somewhere in your town, in your state, in your family, there might be a photograph hidden in a Bible, a name scratched into a wall, a story that someone decided was too dangerous to tell. The only question is whether anyone will ever be brave enough to find it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video with someone who understands that history isn't just dates and battles. It's the people who were erased and the truths that survived despite everything. Subscribe to Nightmare Legacy and hit that notification bell so you never miss these stories. We dig into the sealed records, the hidden photographs, and the buried truths that powerful people try to destroy. The past is never truly gone. It's just waiting for someone to open the right Bible. See you in the next video.